Well, I think you know the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but they were actually also called by other names. They were also called by Hananiah and Mishael and Azariah. So it's a glorious story of faith that we listen to today, but it's not just any faith. It's a faith that proves strong in the face of death, even death in a fiery furnace. But was it a reasonable faith? Just my asking that will make some of you uncomfortable probably, but it's almost as if I'm asking if they should have gone along with Nebuchadnezzar and his request and lived to fight another day and just bowed down. Well, that's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking you is, was their faith reasonable? Now, make no mistake about this. In this story, Nebuchadnezzar is actually reasonable as well. He isn't keeping any secrets. He isn't trying to trick anyone. He isn't running any bait and switch here. When he built this statue, he didn't build something small that you might accidentally miss. It was 90 feet high, 9 feet wide. It was made of gold. And it was set out on the plain of Dura. Now, if that plain was a truly flat plain, now this was set between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers, and the sky was clear, the desert sun was shining, then that gold would have been a brilliant reflector. You couldn't miss it. It'd be visible from 12 and a half miles. Okay, now I figured that out because I took the square root of the height of the statue by feet, divided it by 0.5736, just in case you wanted to know. So 12 and a half miles. And that's, thank you. That's just one direction though. Double that distance when you come from the opposite direction. Don't ask me why, that's what it said. So 25 miles you could see that statue. That would be like seeing the statue in Dundee from Watkins Glen or Penn Yan. Okay, think about that. It isn't hidden. It's on top of, just think about it, in case your eyesight isn't great, and Brian is an eye doctor, so this was very clever on his part, I thought, for him, but you've got cataracts or something maybe, or the visual cues, they could be supplemented by auditory cues as well back then. Nebuchadnezzar was throwing every single instrument in the book into this event, and I love to do this. I'm just going to say them all again. The horn, the flute, the zither, and I'm not sure I want to hear a zither, but it is a stringed instrument. The lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all sorts of other musical instruments they could get their hands on. I think volume there was actually the goal. And as well, there was a proclamation that was read aloud to give clear instructions on what to do when you see this statue and when you hear this sound. And they also included the consequences if you did not follow the directions. So Nebuchadnezzar wasn't hiding anything. He was giving everybody a pretty reasonable expectation, really. He wanted everybody to successfully participate in this event, and he was taking all those necessary steps to make sure everybody was clear on what to do. He was reasonable. Now imagine his surprise when he found out someone had failed to successfully participate. After all those instructions, made him just a little bit upset. In fact, the scripture says Nebuchadnezzar was furious with rage. He's done all this hard work to make this event a success, and somebody still managed to mess it up, to fail to participate. Get a life. It's got to be hard to be a king when your subjects are fools. So the king summoned the fools, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now by the time the three arrive, the king has gathered his composure a little bit, and once again, he sees a reasonable side. Quote, I understand, fellas, you failed to bow down to my statue, and I know you could clearly see it. I understand, fellas, you failed to bow down to my statue when the music that I know you could hear played. I understand, fellas, that you failed to bow down to my statue, even though I know you received the instructions in my proclamation that clearly stated what would happen if you did not bow down. That part about the furnace, did you forget that? So, by my decree, that furnace is where we should be headed right now. But I'm not an unreasonable man. Mistakes happen, misunderstandings. So, fellas, here's what we're going to do. Now, I don't do this for just anyone, by the way, just saying, but I'm going to give you fellas a do-over. I'm going to give you a mulligan. I'm going to give you a second chance. And I'm going to do that because I'm reasonable. You guys get to try it again, and this time think about what you're doing. I know you have your own God to worship, and that's fine. I'm not saying you have to stop worshiping that God. I'm just saying that for this moment in time, we will all together bow down to this God and then get back to our lives. Is that such an unreasonable request? In fact, I think it'd be unreasonable not to do this for me, in so much as I'm your king, and I protect you, I give you a place to live, I give you guys a good paycheck. You got government jobs, guys. So what do you say, fellas? Look out my window here. You can see my statue way down there on the plane. I put the praise team back together again, and when they play the song, all of us are going to have to just bow down and we'll worship that idol. No problems. It's reasonable, right? It's reasonable, right? It seems like the culture has always and is always putting pressure on people of faith. And Christians in particular, they want us to be more reasonable. A couple of hundred years after Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Alexander the Great would roll through this part of the world and bring down the Greek culture with him. After that culture had some time to settle in, that culture started placing some reasonable expectations on the Jews. That Greek culture was, after all, a superior culture, or so they thought. So it was reasonable to expect that the Jews would make some compromises and move forward into the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. Don't be stuck in your old ways in that 5th century BC, guys. Move forward. Be more progressive. After that, Caesar came to town. A new dominant culture, different reasonable expectations, and then another new culture, and so on and so forth. Now let's move forward about 1.5 millennia here, and a new culture begins to take over again. The age of enlightenment arrives. The 16 and 1700s, science and reason begin to grow. And with it becomes the belief faith has neither science nor reason. To this day, there is a perceived struggle between science and faith. And people of faith are looked at as old-fashioned. They're a hindrance to progress. They're naive, they're foolish, they're not very smart, and they're definitely considered unreasonable. Well, new statues were erected that we will be asked to accommodate now. A statue of, for example, inclusiveness. This is a new enlightening thought. Christians aren't inclusive enough. In fact, we're actually exclusive. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. That's pretty exclusive. So the belief that Jesus is the exclusive way to get to God must be put aside so we can go and bow before cultural statues like inclusiveness. We've got to compromise. We've got to be reasonable. Recently, I heard a man, a grandfather who's not trying to be offensive in any way, ask a question. Is the day coming when I'm going to get a phone call from my grandson's school telling me that my grandson has been saying things at school that are considered to be hate speech concerning gender identification, and that they have been told that he's learned it from me, and I'm going to need to stop teaching my grandson what I believe about gender identification. Here's a cultural statue he's fearing he's going to ask to bow down to. Now, there may not be a fiery furnace if we don't comply, but we could lose friends, we could lose face, people are going to ridicule us. They've ridiculed Christians for thousands of years. If you think about it, there are cake bakers and wedding photographers that have lost their jobs because they did not feel comfortable and bowing down to a cultural statue. Some authors have lost book deals. Some athletes get traded or lose their jobs. Teachers have been reprimanded and fired. In fact, in 2014, the California legislature tried to pass a law declaring that the Bible was full of hate speech, and therefore they removed the Bible from all public view. By the way, it failed. The higher stakes, and the higher the stakes, the harder it is to know how to react, how to respond. How do I be reasonable with these requirements thrown at me? What if your life was on the line here? I read a book entitled Silence from Shusaku Endo. In a historical novel, it's set in Japan in the 17th century. It was based on a time when Christian missionaries were in Japan. We had a Christian missionary in Japan. This is not a good feel Christian book, though. It's deeply thought-provoking. It troubled me. It was about a clash between cultures that have come down through history in the world forever. Christianity actually began about 200 years ago in Japan, and it's now outlawed by the ruling shogun. Christians were rounded up and they were tortured and killed for their faith. But the goal of the ruling shoguns was not necessarily the death of their faith, but these Christians, they wanted them to, I'm going to use a big word, apostatize. Apostatize. If you looked it up, it just simply means deny their faith. Shoguns wanted them to deny that faith. And to do this, they were required to step on a picture of Jesus or a picture of Mary and the baby Jesus. The picture was called a fumi, and the action itself was actually called a trample. Now, there are faith and cultural reasons here why this was such an unthinkable thing to do. But in this story, a Jesuit priest comes into Japan in secret, and he's going to minister to faithful Christians who are there, but they have no priest to lead them at this time. Now, he knows he's taking his life in his hands, and he's probably going to be martyred, but his faith is strong, and he believes he's up to the task. That is until some of the Christians who were hiding him were captured and tortured. They're finally killed because he has come to them. Well, he was plainly deeply saddened by that. In the safety of his hiding spot, he was so happy to have by these people, yet he put their life in danger and they lost their lives. The three young men in today's text took a different course, though. Their response to the king was a compelling piece of scripture. King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand as well. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your